I think when you're raising funds, it's more important to have a uh, clear, visually descriptive thing to show investors rather than having it technically work. So story and visuals are way more important than actually building it for some in terms of raising funds.
Yeah.
That's critical.
Everybody, thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I'm super excited to share today's guest with you. Not only has Tallis helped over a dozen entrepreneurs in his career, he's taught a class at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's now launching his first book to actually help entrepreneurs. And in this episode, you're going to get tangible takeaways all about actually how to raise venture capital, how to understand your business's cash flow, and even simpler things on just how to build a team. So stay tuned. It's jam-packed with awesome information. I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. So here we go.
Tallis, please tell us where'd you start, man?
Yeah. So I started my first company in 2004. I was lucky enough to have my dad, who was into entrepreneurship from a young age, and my adoptive uncle, who's exited, I think, something absurd like $500 million or something in his
Oh, wow.
ventures. So yeah, they really supported me and inspired me into getting into entrepreneurship. My first venture was Too Much to Music, and it was basically SoundCloud, but 4 years before SoundCloud was created, and we were just way too early. And I exited by selling to a competitor. And then I got into the corporate world, worked for a pharmaceutical company for a number of years, realized that I hated it, got my MBA, got
Mm,
involved with several other companies, was asked to teach at the University of Colorado, where I had a great time teaching the capstone to the business minor. And yeah, recently wrote a book about my experiences. I've been with over a dozen startups in multiple different industries.
wow. That was that was maybe the biggest summary in the shortest amount of time that I've ever heard. So to swing, let's rewind all the way back. So I mean, I know we mentioned your first venture, it was a recording studio.
Yep.
How'd you sort of get into that space? Was that a passion of yours? And talk me through. I mean, I know you said that you sold there at the end because you were too early, sort
Hmm.
of in that industry,
Yep.
but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that story specifically.
Well, so let's go into the time machine, go back to the early 2000s slash late 90s when I came out with the concept. At that point in time, if you wanted to record some music, you'd have to go to a traditional recording studio. But right around the early 2000s, Logic Pro Studio came out, making home recording a viable option. And if you combine that with the fact that the industry is moving away from WAV format to MP3, the degradation in the file quality allows for digital downloads. Because if you're trying to send a WAV format on the internet based on the speeds back in the early 2000s, that wasn't feasible. So
Yeah.
by switching to MP3, it really spurred the ability to produce high quality music at home for low budget. So what our concept was is to produce a platform that allowed these artists to disseminate their content and give them a lion's share of the proceeds.
Great. So like you said, it was a lot like what SoundCloud is now, um, but
But
just a little
better,
bit
a
earlier.
little bit better monetization, I think. They're having issues with that.
Yeah, they're having issues right now with it. So I mean, when you were running, since you just brought up monetization, how are you actually monetizing that business?
So I think that they could improve the matching in Spotify. Sorry, similar to Spotify and Pandora and those other music streaming services. They have a great way to find music that someone's probably going to like. I think that if SoundCloud invests a little bit more into that, that would be a big benefit for them. But
Yeah.
who am I to say? They were successful in the industry that I was unsuccessful in. So
Yeah, there you go. Right. That's too funny. I'm curious, what are your opinion on SoundCloud versus Spotify now? Do you think they should have worked more together? But it sounds like what you're saying is SoundCloud should have done a little bit more of that, helping people search for new music.
yeah, I mean, the main problem is the revenue to the artist. If you think about how much money an artist is making per stream, it's fractional. And I was really looking at improving that ratio to get artists more money, because the only way you're going to make money on with those streaming services is if you have a gazillion downloads, or sorry, streams rather. However, if you go to more of an iTunes model where you actually sell the music, then you're able to extract more money for the artists. So I'm not a fan of streaming. I don't stream just because I think that the small artists don't benefit from it, and it's mainly just the big giant artists like Taylor Swift who really benefit from streaming.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and so why did you decide to actually sell? Was there like one specific instance that happened, or an outlook? How'd you get to that decision?
Yeah, so what happened was we were trying to raise funds because it's mainly a marketing play, right? We had the access to the talent and we had built a platform, but we needed a substantial amount of money to market this globally, because, well, not just globally, but like, nationally, and then potentially globally. But those marketing dollars weren't there, and I didn't think that it was worth really trying to bootstrap it, because at that time, there really wasn't Kickstarter or any of those other things. And when I was talking to industry-specific investors, they were saying, oh, people are always going to want a physical copy of their CD. They're paying so much money. They want a tangible asset. How are they going to play it in their car if they're just getting downloads on the computer? They're going to bring their computer with them on their car? I've been getting all these, types of responses, and it's really showed me that timing is really critical. You could have an amazing idea, an amazing product, but if the market's not ready for it, then you got to shelf it, or pivot to something else.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so this happened to me in a past venture also. When you're talking about timing, how, I guess, in your experience, have you found the means to find timing, if that even makes sense? Because in my mind, it's just you got to go for it and see if people are ready. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's all about resources, right? If you have the resources to push something, I mean, look at Steve Jobs and the iPhone. I mean, that's probably the easiest example and probably the most cliche example, because they had a gazillion dollars to launch that. But that kind of goes to my point, where if you have the money to launch a product, you can educate consumers and show them that they actually could benefit from this. But the key is finding the capital to get that venture going. And unfortunately, raising capital, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, is almost impossible. At least for your first round of funds, you've got to go friends and family. And if you don't have a rich uncle, then it's it's a very tough uphill battle.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I know actually in the first time that we connected, raising capital was one of the topics that we were talking about.
Yep.
So that's something that you've had a pretty good amount of experience with, and I think a lot of people see it as a huge obstacle and challenge.
It is.
I mean,
Yeah.
Any words of advice to give on it?
Raising capital is key. Valuation is key. Having a balance between giving investors a return because of the risk that they're taking, and also making sure that there's enough equity in the team so that the team stays encouraged and continuing going. That's a very, hard balance, and knowing what milestones that you're aiming for the funds, because you don't want to be stranded between milestones, because then it's almost impossible to raise funds. The best scenario is you have defined milestones and defined deliverables, and you're like, okay, I need this much money to get to this point, at which then I can raise more funds or go to market. And having that figured out before raising capital is key.
Actually defining those specific milestones.
Yeah, because if investors like, yeah, I like your concept, I'll give you $250,000, and you're like, all right, cool, and then you don't spend that $250,000 necessarily, like, not focused enough, then you may not get more money.
Yeah, of course. Because, well, let me ask you this: at these milestones, are investors expecting to start to see a return, maybe when you're hitting those either specific milestones or just goals along the journey?
They want to see traction, and traction can be in terms of users, paid or unpaid. It could be in terms of people subscribing to your mailing list. It could be social media followers. It could be, product development milestones where you are able to move the overall project forward, maybe not have a lot of visibility, but you get a lot of internal traction. Yeah, I mean, as long as you have something to show for your efforts, and that money is being well used, because no investor is going to want to put in new money if their old money wasn't used properly.
Yeah, of course. So they don't necessarily already need to see a monetary return on that investment. They're looking for just traction.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes it takes companies several years to go through R&D before they have a product, especially if you're a hardware product or a deep science project. It could take several years. I'm involved with one project right now where, we finally got all of our patents globally, and we were recently selected by NASA to be a 2019 NASA iTech company. We're presented at the Space Symposium, and it's still difficult to raise funds because, this type of project is, a 5 to 10 year project. It's not a turnaround in 2 years where you get your money back.
Yeah, of course. So I'm curious. I mean, since we were sort of talking about that traction, right? That's what these investors want to see. At least in my mind, for a long time, before you could even go get any investment or pitch an idea at all, you already had to have traction. Now, I know we briefly discussed it before our call, sort of just how you think it should be structured to pitch investors. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think you already actually have to have traction? You don't necessarily have to be launched, but a certain amount of interest, and then how do you actually present that to potential investors?
That's a good question. It really depends on the company. If you're an app company, there's nothing stopping you from getting an MVP because that's just man hours, right? If you're a software-based company, then the only thing you really have to worry about is coding hours. So that's a lot easier. If you're a hardware company and you have, some capital expenditures that need to be taken care of prior to getting to your milestones, then you obviously have to raise that capital. It really depends on the type of company and whether just man hours can handle it, or whether there's things you have to buy that, maybe cost hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment that you might need.
Gotcha. So it's super case dependent.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, there's Techstars Accelerator. I mean, you don't have to go to an investor. You could go to an accelerator program that gives you $100K. There's other accelerators and incubators that give time and resources as well. I really think it's a case-by-case type thing.
Yeah. Would you actually recommend that to people, to go towards an accelerator first before trying to get other funding?
It really depends. Techstars is very competitive. Oftentimes, to get into Techstars, you have to have a product ready to go, and then they just help you commercialize. So Techstars specifically is like that, where they're not really interested in helping R&D. They're more along the lines of, hey, you have this product and you're having difficulty selling it. We'll help you, get traction, get it sold in market.
Gotcha. So that incubator is really, if you already have your technology developed, business is maybe already a little bit profitable, they're trying to scale.
Yeah, Techstars specifically, like, those guys are more along the lines of scaling. That's what they're focused on. Here locally in Boulder, there's Boomtown, which is a little earlier stage, where they even have an IoT lab where you can go in there and use their facilities, their 3D printers, their soldering stuff, and you might not even have to give up any equity. I'm not sure what they're currently offering right now, but at least when I went through the program, we didn't have to give up any equity. But yeah, there's tons of resources. I think that, just getting out there, talking to your local accelerator program and seeing what resources are available is important. I think that making sure that you're knowledgeable in the industry that you're getting into, like if you're going into software development, like an app company, you should probably know enough about software development where you can at least manage a team of developers, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And so do you think that piece of the puzzle, as far as your past knowledge, of course, team is huge into sort of telling the story around your startup, but what all should be included in sort of that clear descriptive story when going out to look for funds?
Team is key. You got to have the people who can execute. So if you go to an investor and they're like, "What do you need?" You're gonna need capital, but you're also going to people in place to get that capital. So having a good team in place is critical, and that really is venture specific, because in some ventures, like for example, a medical device or a pharma drug, which I've been involved with both, you want a really good chief medical officer, and you might not need someone in marketing business development, because you're typically going to be selling that company before it goes to market. Because to take a drug through FDA, or even to take a novel medical device through FDA, is pretty daunting, and so you don't really need to worry about sales or marketing or any of that stuff. Now flip that on its head, and you're doing an app, and you're going to want a ton of marketing, business development, that type of stuff, and you won't need a chief medical officer at all.
Yeah, of course. So as long as you have the correct team in place, depending upon what your venture actually needs.
Yeah, but I'd say every team, no matter what, needs a designer, because everyone needs a good logo and a good website.
Oh yeah, and constantly you're going to be needing new marketing materials,
Yes.
redesign the actual user interface, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Well, that's a great tip to make sure you focus on the designer. Well, Tallis, so we're already so deep, funny enough, into talking about a lot of different ventures that you've been in, right? And raising capital. I know you've mentioned a bunch of different startups you've already worked with. After the first business, right? After the recording studio, you said you got into sales. When did you really start finding this niche?
I did.
Entrepreneurs?
I wasn't in sales. I was in pharmaceutical consulting.
Pharmaceutical consulting. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. I've never been a very good salesperson. I tried that back in high school, doing a horrible sales job that I really hated. But back to the point. Actually, I forgot. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just curious. So you've worked with over a dozen startups.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right? And so you went to pharmaceutical consulting. Is that when you really started working with entrepreneurs in general? Was it just your whole life, after, of course, your dad and your uncle, sort of stemming off of them?
Yeah, so I think after my MBA, that was when I really started helping people, is because finance, and in a good MBA program, you should get a really good understanding of finance. And I found that that's one thing that's really lacking in entrepreneurship. When I went through an accelerator program, myself and one mentor from Goldman Sachs were the only two people who really understood finance. And that was including the program manager, the program director, all the other mentors, all the other people in the startups. Like, it was really shocking how little people knew about finance. And if you want to raise funds, you better know the difference between a capital expenditure and operating expenditure. And if you don't know how to create a cash flow statement where you go over EBITDA and everything, then you're really behind in terms of raising capital. And I talk about that extensively in my book. So if you'd like to check that out, I have two chapters, one about just a general investor strategy, and then one about actual finance and putting together your cash flows and your valuations. Valuation is another thing. Shark Tank is a good example about how people come to investors with unrealistic expectations on the value of their company. And it's important to be realistic and not ask for a valuation that's unrealistic. And there's science into doing evaluation, but at the end of the day, it's about what's fair. Yeah.
And honestly, one big thing I always think about is, look at the partner that you're bringing in, right? You need to think about what their value is, and kind of work that in, right?
That's a very good point. There's smart money and there's dumb money. Smart money is someone who can add value beyond just capital, and then dumb money is just basically anyone who's just money and that's all. It's important to bring in smart money, especially early, because you want advisors, you want people who have a stake in your company and want you to succeed and can give you really good advice. And sometimes that advice is hard to take, but it's important to leverage their experience, and it's very beneficial.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're saying it. So advice can be hard to take, right? Have you found that is one of either the most important things in entrepreneurship, or one of the things that stands most in the way of people not being able to take outside advice, understand their weaknesses potentially?
I agree. Yeah, totally. I think that another thing to take into consideration is mentor whiplash. I didn't come up with that term. That was something that someone else did, but it's a very important concept where you may have two very capable, smart, highly successful business people or entrepreneurs that give you conflicting advice, and you've got to make the best of it. And you just got to take into consideration that these people are just using their life experiences and trying to give you advice based on what's worked for them. And because every business is different and every situation is different, and through the course of time, situations change and how you should deal with them. You should take a wide range of advice and then kind of take them all with a grain of salt, distill them, and try to come up with your own strategy based on everyone's feedback.
Gotcha. And so that mentor whiplash is really the conflicting opinions.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happens. It causes you. There you go, whiplash.
Exactly.
Now I figured it out. Everywhere. That's too funny. Okay, so pharmaceutical consulting. Was this specifically for startups or
No,
bigger
these are
business?
massive pharma companies. However, it was kind of ridiculous. I remember the moment that I realized I was going to quit and go to grad school and go back into entrepreneurship. And that moment was I was taking a Six Sigma efficiency management course, and I was learning all about standard deviations and Sigma levels. And we're talking about this in the interview, and I realized that the interviewer was glazed over and had no idea what I was talking about. I'm going to go get my MBA and do this myself because I can't deal with working for an idiot.
Yeah, most definitely. And so you decided to switch to go back to school, right?
Yeah, back to school, got my MBA, got back into entrepreneurship. I, at that point, helped my uncle with an oil company that he was then exiting. Then I got involved with a hospice company, helped them launch it, a couple medical devices, fintech company that my buddy from the World Bank started, and I advised on a dating app. I advised on a ride share play. Involved in CFO of a pharmaceutical drug that should be going into second round animal trials in the next month or so. And
wow, so from an oil company, hospice, fintech, when you say you were advising them, consulting for them, what specifically were you helping them achieve?
Mainly strategy and finance, getting a handle of their costs and figuring out what their potential revenue streams are going to look like. It's really simple for me, but it's really difficult for just someone who's never done it before. So
yeah,
I take an equity stake in the venture, and in exchange, I perform some basic CFO type activities.
Okay, so you're acting as the CFO.
In a couple of them, I am. I'm currently CFO of 3 companies and CEO of 2.
Nice. Do you enjoy it? Which role do you enjoy more?
It depends on the venture. I enjoy not having to make the decisions on some ventures because it's not something that I necessarily want to have to do. But if it's something that I'm very passionate about, I prefer, being more hands-on, being a CEO. It's kind of like, I'm not sure what a good analogy would be. Maybe cooking. If it's some dish that you really like, you want to be involved and prepare it yourself. Or if it's something you're like, yeah, I'll help my wife cook dinner, and I'll assist as long as I'm not having to lead the ship.
Yeah, right. I can imagine. Funny enough, using that cooking right as a reference right there. Let's say you're like the consultant standing there, like, okay, yep, and to make this pasta, we're gonna probably need about 4 cups of water. And the person that's making the decision is just like, no, let's just use 2. So there you go. That's too funny. And so you brought up actually helping a lot of these companies figure out their potential revenue streams.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously, finance is a big passion of yours. And earlier you mentioned just importance of cash flow in general.
Mm-hmm.
If it's okay, if we can go into that here a little bit, maybe give some examples of these companies you are trying to educate them about the importance of cash flow and actually trying to figure out their potential revenue streams.
Yeah, that's a great one. This is a company I haven't mentioned yet, but it's probably the best example of it. So I was advising on a online platform that did, how can I put this? The distribution of a regulated product, and
Okay.
there's basically selling pot-related stuff legally in California, and their cash flow numbers didn't make any sense because the way it was set up, they were making less money per new customer until you got to a point where they were starting to lose money per customer based on their model. And I'm like, you do realize that you should be making more money as you grow and not less money as you grow?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. I'm like, Jesus. So
How did they even get to that point? Because that is,
they had money, they had dumb money. And because people were excited about investing in that industry. And so they had a bunch of money thrown at them. And they didn't have anyone who understood finance, even though they did have an MBA on there who should have understood finance, but obviously he didn't. And that just goes to show, just because you have an MBA doesn't mean you actually know what you're doing. But yeah, I pointed that out and helped them make the numbers make sense, because it wouldn't make, like, imagine if you had more money at 1,000 customers than you would at 10,000. That doesn't make any sense at all.
no, of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so that seems pretty obvious, right? You need to be making more money as you grow. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, when it comes to cash flow, you always need to be having coming in through as many revenue streams as possible.
Yep.
What do you think they missed? How did they get into that situation?
If I remember correctly, they were giving a higher percentage of the sales to their affiliates based on number of sales. So like the more sales, the more that the outfit would get. So like, let's say I had a vape pen company and I wanted to sell them on this platform. If I sold less, the vape company would get less per sale, but if they sold more, they would get more per sale. And that really didn't make sense. It should be flipped. You should be making more per lower volume, and just because economies of scale.
Higher volume.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
I mean, if you're buying one widget, you're gonna pay more for that one widget than if you bought 10 million widgets. Then you'd be less the marginal rate would be less, right? So they just had that inversed.
Interesting. And they just they inversed it one time accidentally, and no one just caught on.
I have no idea whether they did it accidentally or whether it was just through incompetence, but yeah, their numbers did not make any sense at all. And it took more to explain it to them than I was anticipating. And they actually gave me some pushback on it. And I'm like, math is math. Just look at the numbers.
Yeah, of course. So I'm not sure if this question is even going to make sense, but I mean, do you have any advice to give on, I mean, either just understanding your cash flow or making sure that, you have positive cash flow, which that's why it seems so counterintuitive question that of course you have to have positive cash flow.
Understanding the difference between capital expenditures and operating expenditures is key. Just look at Amazon. Amazon was making money, and instead of making, so the way, I have to back up a little bit. So you have your revenue, and then you deduct your operating expenditures, and then you have your EBITDA. Once you have your EBITDA, then you subtract your capital expenditures, and then you have your profit, right? And then after profit, then that's what is taxed, right?
Of course.
So what Amazon was doing was at the EBITDA level, so prior to deducting capital expenditures, they figured out if they could maximize their capital expenditures to have no profit, they would be not taxed. And those capital expenditures ended up being AWS, Amazon Web Services.
Yeah.
So they bought servers. And so they never really had to pay any tax on anything because they just reinvested, maxed out on the capital expenditures, essentially. So understanding the difference between the two is important.
Yeah, extremely. So this is pretty interesting. So you're talking about essentially at the beginning of 2019, huge thing came out, right, that Amazon wasn't paying any taxes, right? Everybody thought it was this huge scam, huge scheme. And so what you were saying is essentially they just figured out that by increasing their capital expenditures, then they essentially weren't going to be taxed on anything because there was going to be, quote unquote, no profit.
Exactly. Yep.
Nice. So is that something that you would actually recommend to other businesses to do themselves?
If you're producing a steady revenue stream and you don't want to pay taxes, then yeah, invest in capital expenditures, whether it's like a building or property or something that is a tangible asset that you can depreciate over time. That is a very good accounting trick to look at. In fact, it's such a big issue. That's the reason why almost no big giant company pays any sort of taxes. So I'm kind of working on a policy proposal where we switch it from taxing profits to taxing EBITDA, because one of the things that's happening is automation. And if you're able to use, like Amazon, the delta between your operating expenditures and your profit and maximizing that capital expenditures and putting robots that then does the fulfillment for you, does all the warehouse work for you, then you don't have to pay for employees. And so it's basically helping them reduce their operating expenditures even more than they would. I don't like the idea of profits being taxed. I think EBITDA should be taxed personally, but that's just me.
I mean, when you put it that way, it makes so much sense because it's essentially then almost a never-ending loop of this loophole that's allowing you to almost grow your company more and thus not be taxed for it.
Yeah. The other thing that I think we should get rid of is payroll tax, because it's very onerous on startups. Every startup, if they're smart, they hire all their employees through as a contractor and do that type of relationship rather than a W-2 or W-4. You do a 1099. And the other thing about payroll taxes is you're incentivizing a company to automate rather than hiring someone. Like if you think about Andrew Yang and him talking about automation being what's going to be happening in the next 20 years or so, I don't think payroll taxes is a way to prevent that from happening. It's almost a accelerator to that type of activity.
Yeah, it sounds like a very outdated model to me. That before automation was a threat, or lack of a better word, well, I'm going to say a threat, payroll tax made sense. It seems that now the world's changed.
Yeah, I mean, automation is going to be coming for a lot of jobs. I think The Economist is saying nearly 50% of jobs have the potential to be automated in the next 50 years. So
time will tell, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, something needs to change. And so you said that's actually a policy that you're busy working on?
Yeah, I have something on my website talking about it. I also have a couple other things. I'm a proponent of a UBI system, especially for entrepreneurs. If you think about the money that would have gone to capital in terms of like investor capital, if the government were to basically create their own venture fund and convert the money that they were giving away free on grants and exchange, then they'd be able to have a giant fund, and then that would pay for a UBI system.
A UBI system.
Universal basic income.
Universal basic income. Nice. And so is that another policy, I guess, or that specific mindset or that idea, is that what Andrew Yang also was talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's an entrepreneur. He
Yeah.
understands.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I've actually had way too many people just reach out to me, just asking my opinion on Andrew Yang, and so I had to like start educating myself, because everybody's just like, yeah, he's all entrepreneurs just loving him so much. Right?
Yeah, just think about it. I mean, like, how many more people would be able to start a startup if they were getting an extra $1,000 a month, and they remove the opportunity cost? They're able to have their basic needs met, and they could add value to society. I think it's a no-brainer.
I mean, I don't have any arguments against that right there. That's sounding pretty good to me. Cool. So it's just following along literally your story here, right? I guess next step, I mean, after you were consulting for all of these oil companies and hospice and fintech, so much stuff, you said you were a teacher at the University of Colorado for a while.
Yeah, I taught one class. I had a great experience. I wouldn't do it again, just because there's, I enjoy my freedom too much. It's there's too many administrative, bureaucratic things that I just am not. I don't enjoy. So
yeah,
that's why I wrote the book, is because
perfect.
I figure if kids aren't going to have the opportunity to take my class, at least they can read my book. I use a lot of the premises from my class in the book as well, so it's pretty good. Definitely pick it up.
Nice. I mean, so since you just mentioned again, so it's called Savvy Entrepreneurs Business Handbook.
Yes, sir.
Where's the best place for people to pick it up?
So you can pick it up on pretty much every platform ebooks are sold. Amazon, Lulu, Apple, Kindle. Well, I guess that would be Amazon. What's the other one? Nook. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, all of them. I'm doing the print version. That should be released in the next 2 or 3 months, where the formatting, I wanted it to be perfect. So I'm making sure that it's not an MVP, that's actually ready to go, which is different, right? Because when you're in entrepreneurship, you're like, yeah, it's good enough, publish it. And that's what I do with ebook, because the content in the book's not changing. That's the same. But the polished finish of the outside, people really do judge books by their cover. So
yeah, they definitely do. So that's what you're waiting before you actually get the hardcover or the physical version out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice. So here, yeah, you can always update a cover picture on a digital version.
That was my thoughts exactly.
That's too funny. So it's interesting to hear you say, right, that at the university, right, you just didn't, I don't know, the fit wasn't there. Too much politics, bureaucracy, whatever it was. The online teaching space is becoming so much bigger, right? Every single day I hear about a new program, or Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi released a whole big education on teaching you how to teach online. Is that an industry that you've thought about getting into, or just what's your opinion on it in general?
I've used Udemy classes for learning how to do basic development, and I don't do development myself. I use that as a tool to help me be a better manager of development. So I do enjoy online classes. I have thought about doing my own. However, I just don't have the time. I'm positioning 2 of my ventures for exit. So once that happens, I will have a little bit more time, and I have, seriously considered it. Have you done any online type classes?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm very, very pro. I actually, I'm not saying I am a pro. I'm saying I'm very pro learning online. So my background was in just communications and public relations, a lot of on the business side, but then I switched to marketing entirely through online learning. Really, I mean, I took a bunch of Udemy classes. I found a couple private classes as well. And so that's kind of steered my entire journey up into this point. And so I love the idea. The only fear in my mind is people who aren't qualified starting to teach classes and
Yeah.
people not knowing how to vet the different courses.
Yeah, that's very important. I mean, that's the same problem people have with those not crowdsource, freelance websites. Like you could, let's say you need a designer, you need a CTO or something, you go to a freelance website. Like it's very difficult to understand what caliber of person you're going to be getting. And I guess it would be the same issue with the online courses as well.
Yeah. Have you hired people through either, Upwork, Freelancer, Fiverr, all of those different spots?
I have not. I pride myself on networking well, and I've pretty much found everyone who's helped me with my ventures through some sort of social interaction or through recommendations. I've been able to really, or just reaching out to them directly. Like for example, for this for the NASA related company, we were reading a scholarly paper, and there was this particular scientist who was cited frequently in these papers. And so we're like, all right, let's just reach out to him. And we just onboarded him onto the team. So this guy is like a world-renowned researcher, teaches at Caltech and researches at MIT.
Wow.
So just by reaching out to him and showing him our vision, we were able to bring him on. So if you find someone who you think is a rock star and you really want them to be on your team, it wouldn't hurt to reach out. Sometimes they'll be jiving with what you're saying and would like to join what you're doing.
I like it. And then as far as that outreach is concerned, what was your process like? Did you just find their phone number and call them up? How'd you do it?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, their email. I found their email, university email, and sent them a message, and he responded within like an hour, and we set up a call for later that week and had several introductory calls, and I just chatted with him an hour before this, and we came up with some really groundbreaking stuff that I can't talk about because we're in the process of patenting, but yeah, some really cool stuff.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Nice. I like it. The reason why I ask is because, my background being in public relations, people are all the time asking me about outreach. And people, a lot of times, they overcomplicate it just because now, especially with all these social platforms, you can reach out through those socials, or you could email them, or you could call them, or whatever. But it sounds like the simplest advice.
Yeah, I'd recommend email or phone. For some reason, I think that there's some sort of stigma to dropping in someone's DMs, which isn't as formal as going into the email box. So I'd recommend trying to find the email.
Yeah. See, funny enough, my opinion is formality wise, I like email. However, a lot of times you can get lost in an email inbox pretty easily.
It's true.
Whereas if you look at LinkedIn per se, which I'm super heavy on LinkedIn, I actually tell a lot of people to try outreach originally through LinkedIn, either just before or at the same time as email. It's way less crowded. You can see open rates a lot higher.
Yeah, I haven't tried that yet. That's a good point. Thanks for the suggestion.
Yeah, I'll tell a quick funny story. I actually have a friend who's in big financial real estate up in Washington, D.C., and he's looking at switching job positions. And I asked him, I was like, well, who's your ideal company that you would want to work for? Go find their CEO or someone in HR on LinkedIn and reach out to him. The next week, he found himself sitting in the CEO's office, like a big penthouse, just massive. I don't know what the message was that he sent him, but just cold outreach through LinkedIn, got invited to come to the company and just come chat.
That's awesome. Yeah. Gumption, right? It's all about that stick-to-itiveness and gumption.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Tallis, so we've touched on a lot. I mean, this is your story. This is how you've helped so many entrepreneurs and businesses throughout your career already. If there was one big takeaway that you want, either people who are just starting their first venture, maybe they're already deep into it, what do you want them to take away?
Product market fit. That is the most important thing outside of finance, because you could have the best product in the world, but if no one else is going to buy it, then it's really not worth anything at all. And a lot of times people over-engineer things. I'll give you an example from BozyFit. With BozyFit, we are a hardware device and software platform that looks at performance of the body for athletic purposes, working out, and that type of thing. So we did a very extensive 5-point sensor system on the body, on above and below each joint that we're looking at measuring, and on the torso, and blah, 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 blah. But it turned out that if you just put a single sensor on the piece of equipment that you're working on, it's a lot easier for the person to consume. They don't have to worry about putting on a bodysuit. You don't have to worry about washing a garment. It just clips onto whatever piece of equipment is, and it actually gets better data. So I highly recommend that anyone who's got a product, think about the use case, understand, is someone going to go through the process of using this? And if you can simplify the process at all, do so. And really talking to your customers, understanding what their pain points are and how you can achieve that goal for them as simply as possible.
As simply as possible. And so the biggest piece that stood out there, well, it's funny that you guys created such like an advanced piece of tech and you just needed to simplify it so much, right, to get much better results. But as far as actually talking to your potential customers, right, almost assessing the market, what have you found to be most effective in sort of achieving that?
It's really important for BozyFit. We had to talk to trainers, and we had to talk to physical therapists, orthopedic surgeons, all sorts of people who are involved, kinesiologists, people who are involved in that whole industry, because we had to decide whether we were going to be a physical therapy product or a consumer product. And just talking to as many potential stakeholders as possible and understanding what each individual stakeholder's pain points are and kind of mapping that out. It helped us identify social media fitness influencers as our easiest target audience. So what BozyFit basically does is it helps a fitness influencer who has 50, 100,000, 250,000 followers easily deliver digital content to as many people as they want, tens of thousands of people, just for the same amount of effort that it would take to do one person's workout profile or workout program.
Oh, wow.
So we just through talking to a whole lot of different stakeholders in that industry, we identified those influencers to be the lowest hanging fruit for us because they already have millions of people following them who want their workout content. And prior to BozyFit, the only thing that they could do was record a video, and video isn't the best thing to work out with because when you're in the gym and you're trying to lift weights while watching video, I think that's dangerous. And
definitely.
And then the other thing being, spreadsheets that they could disseminate. So neither one of those are very effective. So we just found a market inefficiency and we put ourselves in between them. And that's what I recommend other people do is do your research, identify your market segment, talk to your stakeholders, and figure out who is the most apt to buy your product.
I like it. I like the story, especially because in the beginning you were thinking, are we going physical therapists? Are we going more everyday consumers? You almost landed in the middle there, right? The actual influencers in the fitness space.
Yeah, and what's funny is that we might get bought by someone in the medical space in the next 6 months or so, depending on how launch goes. So yeah, we're really excited about that.
Nice. Well, congrats. I hope it happens.
Thanks.
We'll have to stay tuned. Yeah, no doubt. Tallis, thanks so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I myself got a lot out of this. You could even just see my notes. It's wild over here. And so I'm sure everybody else did too. And so once again, just thanks so much. If there's one place, you want people to either get your book, follow you, what's the final thing to leave them with?
Yeah, so you can check out my website, tallis.co, tallis.co. I've got free resources for entrepreneurs. I've got a sample pitch deck, sample cash flows, sample executive summary that feel free to use. My book is also available on my website. And I'd be happy to, respond on social media. If you want to find my book on Twitter, send me a tweet. And if you have a simple question, I'd be happy to see what I can do to help.
Love it. I'll definitely link down to your website, to your Twitter also below, so everybody has easy access to you. And once again, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Wayne. It's great chatting with you.
Great chatting with you. All right, bye.
All right, bye.
Nice, man.
That was good. Thank you.
That was awesome.